The books vary. Some of them they're very much mosaics. So to give an example, she was in Lyme Regis in 1804. She wrote a bunch of letters from Lyme because her sister Cassandra, her principal correspondent, had been with her in Lyme and then left them. And there's no explanation of why Cassandra left. But Jane's still there with her parents, and she wrote a series of letters to Cassandra about everything that happened in this 2-week period in Lyme Regis. That became the template for my book. Everybody she mentions as a character. If she went out to a ball or a card party or a concert on a given night, she does that in the book. She mentions sea bathing. She mentions being a little ill. She mentions the coroner of Lyme, happily enough, because there's always a coroner in a murder mystery. She mentions, I mean, it's fascinating when you start researching the history of Lyme at the time. She ran into all of these people and they're all in the book. One of them is the murderer, one of them is the victim. So that was fun, but it was hard because it was like fitting my story into an existent structure. In the other case in the series is when there are no letters at all, because for periods of time, sometimes for a couple of years, there are no letters in the record, either because she and Cassandra were not apart or because after she died, Cassandra lived on for about 20 years and became very Victorian and was embarrassed by Jane and some of the things Jane said. So she destroyed some of the letters, or she cut pieces out of the existing letters because she didn't want her nieces and nephews who would inherit the correspondence to see what Aunt Jane had said. So there are gaps in the letters. And in numerous cases, I have filled those gaps with my own fiction. Oh, that's a really difficult question, Jake, because I've been doing it so long. I slip into Jane just like that. I don't know why, but you had said what do I value most about them? And it is the language. I find it effortless to write in Austenese, which is passive voiced, fairly archaic in its structure. It's not even Victorian prose. It's much earlier.
Yeah.
But there are two ways that she writes, which is also interesting. There's the narrative voice of her fiction that many of us are familiar with. But then there's this very intimate voice of her letters, which she was viciously funny. She was very cruel. And that has been inspiring because that level of intimacy and humor is something important to the character. I think in the voice that I'm trying to capture is mostly the voice of the letters. My full name is Francine Stephanie Barron Mathews. So Stephanie's my middle and Barron is my maiden name, and I've been signing Barron as long as I've been signing Mathews, so it's very easy for me. That came about because of publishers. I had, as I mentioned, my first 2 novels were at William Morrow, and I then wrote the first Jane Austen manuscript, and I sold it to an editor, beloved editor with whom I did 22 novels, Kate Misiak, at Random House. And Random would not, any publisher would not publicize the name that another publisher was publishing. So at the time, the Mary Folgers were at Morrow and Avon, and the Janes were at Random House. And so I had to have a separate name. And I just came up with the using my other names thing because I figured it'd be easier to sign. I think Jane and the Still Room Maid, which is set at Chatsworth in Derbyshire, I enjoyed writing. Jane and the Ghosts of Netley, which is about the death of a key character in the whole series, I really enjoyed. Jane and the Madness of Lord Byron, because it's fun to write about Lord Byron. And probably the one I've just finished.
Title?
It's going to be called Jane and the Year Without a Summer. And it was a difficult book to write, partly because of the pandemic we're living through. but mostly because 1816 was an equally difficult year in England. The economy was shot. There'd been a volcanic eruption in Indonesia, which changed weather patterns globally, and there was famine hitting throughout the United States. It rained. It's the year that Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein because she was stuck in frigid weather on the lakeshore of the northern Italian lakes. And so it's a very potentially grim book, partly because Jane is starting to be ill with the disease that killed her, which interestingly is the same disease Jack Kennedy had, Addison's.